Story time about how a stranger wandered into my house and it led to something amazing. I woke up one night to someone ringing my doorbell over and over vigorously. I looked at the clock and I saw it was 3 in the morning. I went to the door and looked out of the peephole and saw a young woman outside on my porch. I opened the door and could immediately tell that she was intoxicated. She started explaining to me that she was at a bar down the street and lost her phone. That's when she asked if she could use mine and call someone for a ride home. It was freezing outside, so I reluctantly let her in. She asked me for water, so I led her to the kitchen. She proceeded to open my fridge and start eating my lunch meat and various other snacks. She then kicked off her heels and sat down at the table with a jar of pickles and started talking to me like she's known me for years. She told me her name was Krista and asked me how work was and what I was up to tomorrow. I reminded her that she needs to call someone to come pick her up and handed her my cell phone. She took the phone and FaceTimed her brother. She told him that she needs a ride but she has no idea where she's at and handed me the phone to talk to him. I told him the situation and gave him my address to come pick her up ASAP. A few seconds later, my doorbell began ringing again and someone started banging on my door. I went to the door and opened it to find a guy outside and he looked furious. This is when things got intense.
This is why you should always breathe through your nose. In 2009, a Russian man named Artyom Sidorkin started experiencing intense chest pains to the point where he couldn't even stand up. He tried to ignore it, but when he started coughing up blood, he went to the emergency room. They gave him an x-ray and it revealed a fist-sized tumor growing in his lung. Afterwards, the doctor told Mr. Sidorkin, unfortunately, it looks like cancer. But before they could start removing large chunks of his lung, the doctor needed to do a biopsy to see if it really was cancer. So a terrified Mr. Sidorkin came in a few days later, they performed the biopsy, and the surgeon, as he was looking at the tissue, noticed something. Tucked in the middle of the tissue was a 5-centimeter long fir tree. Mr. Sidorkin was a botanist, and he was a big mouth breather, and at some point while he was working, he managed to inhale a fir tree seed. When the doctors told him he didn't have cancer, he had a tree, he was shocked, and he said, "I had no sense that a tree was growing in my lungs." But more than shocked, he was just happy to be cancer-free.
Story time about how my boyfriend shames me for having cellulite. Disclaimer is not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. I'm 24 years old and my boyfriend is 21. According to him, he has never been with any girl who's had cellulite before, or even an ounce of body fat. Yes, I know what you're thinking, he's a total asshole, which in that sense, he is. But the rest of the time, he's completely fine and actually sweet. We met last year at a friend's party. At the party, I instantly fell in love with him. I thought he was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. And it was reciprocated. I saw him from across the room and he made eye contact. A few minutes later, he walked over to me and just struck up a conversation. I know that people present themselves the way they want to be seen, especially when they're trying to impress someone they're attracted to. He started telling me about how he's studying to be a doctor, how he volunteers at animal shelters, and that every single weekend he also volunteers at the soup kitchen. Everything he said was absolutely perfect. By the end of the night, he had asked me out on a date and I said yes. I did explain to him that I didn't want anything serious and he said that was totally fine. I was trying to focus on my studies, so having a boyfriend was not in my plans. But after we went on 7 dates, he asked me to be his girlfriend. He wouldn't take no for an answer. After about a month, I finally said
This is why you should never ask too many questions. Once there was an old lady who was widowed and wheelchair bound, living in a house with 2 floors with her caretaker. One day, the police received a call from this old lady's house. The caretaker had been murdered. One detective was sent to investigate, where he found the caretaker's body on the 1st floor, vocal cords ripped out, lying in a pool of blood. The old lady was ruled out as a suspect because she was immobile, but the detective did note that this crime seemed familiar to how the widowed husband died years ago. He had suffocated in his sleep on the couch downstairs when the old lady was upstairs. After getting evidence from the 1st floor crime scene, the detective asked to look upstairs as well. The old lady refused at first, but he insisted and went up anyways. Everything seemed pretty normal until a shocking revelation came over him, and it sent chills down his spine. It was a detail that investigators had overlooked in the murder of the widow's husband as well. There is no phone on the 2nd floor. The detective then suddenly heard a noise, withdrew his weapon, and ran out of the room, only to find an empty wheelchair.
When I was in 6th grade, I went to go visit my little cousins at their house. Their house was right on the edge of these woods. And the woods were really thick, and our parents always told us not to go there. And one time I asked my mom why, and she said because when people do bad things, they sometimes go and hide in the woods. I was staying at my cousin's house for a week on this one trip. And whenever I was bored, I would go look out the window and watch the woods. Usually it was pretty boring, and I would just be staring at trees. But one day it was like 5 p.m. and the sun was setting, so it was getting dark, and I saw something moving in the woods. I told my uncle, and he said it was probably just an animal. And I told him no, it was tall and looked like a skinny lady. And he said I have a creative imagination and it was probably just a deer. But then a few minutes later, I heard my aunt and uncle whispering in the kitchen. My aunt was talking about a woman from the psychiatric hospital in their town who had escaped. Their house was like 15 minutes away from a maximum security psychiatric hospital for criminals with mental illness. And then they saw me listening to them in the doorway and they stopped talking completely. A few days later, in the middle of the night, I heard a noise downstairs.
Story time about my sister's crazy Tinder date. So this took place during the pandemic 2 years ago, and she was ready to start dating. By the way, at the time we were 17 and we're twins. So May, June, this is when she started talking to this guy, which we're gonna call Aiden. Now, I didn't know too much about Aiden besides the fact that he was 2 years older and he lived in the same city. But they were talking for weeks, and she would always say that they're just friends. And I wanted to know more about him, but it felt like she was hiding him for whatever reason. So I think a couple weeks after them talking, she told me that they were gonna go on a date. So the day she went on the date, I went to go hang out with my boyfriend. So later on that night, when she came back home, I asked her, of course, like, how did the date go? And she told me it went really bad, and she blocked him. But she didn't give me too much details besides the fact that she would not be talking to him anymore. So then maybe a week later, we get a knock on the door, and it was Aiden. And I thought she blocked him. Part 2 of my sister's crazy Tinder date. So when I opened up the door, it was Aiden. He busted in the house asking why I never answered any of the phone calls. And that day, my boyfriend was there and he got up and he yelled at him to get back. And remember how I told you guys that me and my sister were twins? I was thinking maybe he was getting me confused with my sister, which he was. And I of course told him that I'm not her. And he looked at my boyfriend and was seriously about to fight him, talking about, you found a new man already. Even though my boyfriend did not know what was going on, he was still all for it. And Aiden got so mad that he literally attacked him. As I was trying to stop everything, my sister finally came downstairs. She ran and pulled him out, and we practically all kicked him out. And my sister threatened to call the cops. After Aiden was gone and the whole situation died down, my sister told me that he was bipolar, which is why she completely cut him off. She told me she hasn't spoken to him in days and didn't expect him to pop up at all. I thought everything was cool until 2 days later he popped up again.